had a lot of network issues, and we could not really have the seminar, and there was a promise that we'll have a repeat of that. But because of um, a situation beyond our control, would have to peg that till would have a favorable time to have the same presentation. So just bear with us. Would have that same topic and same presenter come back to facilitate that. But tonight, I'm sure that you've seen from the information that has been sent across that tonight we'll be having something exciting, and it is the approaches to formulating research objectives, questions, and hypotheses. Yeah, I'm sure you got that from the link that was sent to you for the seminar of tonight. And we have a very knowledgeable person taking us and facilitating that for us tonight. He's a teacher for over 20 years who has taught both undergraduate and postgraduate students. He is a senior lecturer and an acting dean of the East African School of Higher Education Studies and Development. He holds a PhD in Education Management and a master's degree in the same educational management. As I said earlier, he has taught for over 20 years and is from Uganda. He's a part of the staff of one of the recent conducting workshop and seminar for graduate students and academic staffs in several universities in Uganda. So be assured that the facilitator tonight and and he is versatile in the field and the line of study. So please join me, everyone, to welcome Dr. David Onen as he takes the seminar tonight. Dr. David Onen, you're welcome, sir.
Yes. Thank you so much, Madam Mistress of Ceremonies. Are
Welcome,
you
sir.
hearing me?
Very clearly, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Ryu, my brother, and the leadership of the International Association for Innovations in Educational Assessment, my senior colleagues and peers in attendance, our graduate students, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I'm humbled to be here to talk to the members of our beloved association. The last time I talked to you was about a month and maybe some weeks ago. And I've been eagerly waiting to have another opportunity like this to share my little knowledge in the area of research methodology. Again, this evening, I'm going to share my knowledge with you on another simple topic in research method. I call it simple, but normally I get worried that our graduate students take a little bit so long to pick these simple concepts. And over the years, I've noticed students taking so long a time on their graduate programs, well beyond the stipulated period. And that worries me a lot. Right back home in Makerere, where I teach, our PhD students are taking, the other time I said, up to 4 or 5 years trying to work on their proposals. And sometimes they take well beyond 6, 7 years, and somebody has not yet defended his or her PhD proposal. And I mentioned last time that I strongly believe that one of the reasons why students take so long on their graduate training programs is because most times they have not understood certain basic concepts, like the concept of the research problem and how to formulate appropriate research questions, research objectives, and hypotheses. So, colleagues, I want to welcome you again. As you might have noticed, my focus in the first seminar that I facilitated and on this one is mainly on graduate students. My senior colleagues of the association who are in attendance may only help me to reiterate some of the points that I may be raising, but my target is on the graduate students, particularly PhD students. In today's discussion, as I said, I want us to talk about how to derive research objectives, questions, and hypotheses. I think before I start my presentation, let me share the slide that we are going to use for the discussion. That is the slide we are going to use for our discussion. Now, like I said, before we talk about how do you formulate an acceptable research question or questions, objectives, and hypotheses, I want to say that before we delve into that, we should first remind ourselves about what we talked about the last time. The reason being that you cannot talk about research objectives or questions or hypotheses without talking about the research problem. These objectives and questions and hypotheses are supposed to help you address the research problem that you're investigating. So we cannot start talking about how to formulate the objectives without talking about briefly again the research problem which I talked about the last time. Colleagues, you might remember I had a figure slightly different from this, but which had these elements. That what is the research problem? Because we mentioned the last time that research is about addressing a problem. Even if the problem is a desirable situation which you want to study so that you can consolidate it, which some people may say an opportunity. In common research language, that is still the problem you want to address. You want to study something desirable so that it is understood well and can be maintained. We call it normally appreciative inquiry. Even in a scenario where you're doing appreciative inquiry, that is still a problem. So in this slide, again, I'm trying to remind you that we have many definitions of what the research problem is. The research problem is the issue that the researcher intends to investigate. It is a question to be answered by the researcher, a difficulty to be overcome, a deficiency that needs to be overcome, a condition that exists in reality that needs some improvement, a gap in knowledge which exists in literature that needs to be filled, a theory that requires meaningful understanding or testing, a body of knowledge or views held in different environment that requires to be validated. A research problem is a desirable condition that needs clear understanding and maintenance. It is a gap between what is and what is expected. Now, these are 10 different ways of looking at the same thing, the research problem. Now that means as a graduate student, you need to try and understand what exactly is the problem, because it is not looked at as one thing. It has different aspects, and you can see the definition are multiple. The last time we said that research problems come from mainly two areas. One is from our day-to-day life experiences. In our homes, there are problems which we can research about. At our workplaces, there are problems we can research about. In society where we live, there are problems that we can observe, that we experience, that we can research about in order to understand them better. That is why I drew this figure, and on one side you see life experiences with several aspects of experiences that a research problem can come from. But we also say the research problem can emanate from literature, from the writings of other people. A research problem can emanate from the writing of other scholars before you. When you read on a given topic, you'll find that not everything has been written on a given topic. There are knowledge gaps that you may want to fill that gap. A research problem may emanate from a theory you want to test. A research problem may emanate from your interest to duplicate a study. So the roots of the research problem are from our personal life experiences and from uh, literature. Okay. Now, how do you identify a research problem? This is something I talked about. I'm just going to go over them very fast, then we shall go into something. We said there are two common approaches to identify the research problem. And they are in that figure I've just left, that the research problem can come from literature or from our life experience. If it is to come from literature, most times you have to select a research area. First of all, a research area, a broad one, can be called a field of knowledge. Then the specific research area, then a more minute area where your topic will come and where the problem will be identified from. So you can identify your research problem by selecting a research field, a broad one. You narrow it into a more specific area of knowledge. Then you read widely about it until you are, for instance, if I gave you an example just for people to use in their own case, your research area or a field can be child-focused research or child-focused studies. For us in education, some people are interested in doing child-focused studies. Now, that is a field of research, a broad one, which education specialists can be interested. Health health people may be interested also a bit, because the issue of education and health for children cannot be divorced totally. Okay. Now, when the field is as broad as the child-focused research, then you can, for instance, narrow it to a smaller area like child development, parenting and family studies, violence against children, early childhood education, children and technology. Those are now a little bit narrower research areas, but they may not even be very narrow. You can still break them into much, much smaller fields. Out of those areas, you can identify a topic that you want to research about. A topic is a breakdown of that narrow research area which you have been able to identify, okay, which you may want to read widely about and see whether you can identify a research problem from, okay, like violence and psychological well-being of children, nature, causes and effects of bullying in schools. And so this one, you are getting it from this other breakdown of the research area, okay. Now, once you're being able to read widely on a topic that you have identified by yourself, the most important thing here is that you need to identify what we call research gaps. Now, what are research gaps? Research gaps are the knowledge gaps existing in literature, which you have widely read and found that earlier scholars before you have not adequately addressed. Now, it is in those areas of research gaps that you identify your research problem. Okay, you identify your research problem. I'm going to show you how it happens. Another way of detecting the research problem, we say this by observing what happens at home, in society, in our workplaces. But even when you observe a problem at your home or in your workplace and so on, you cannot claim that it is already a research problem you want to research unless you can prove that it has not been ably dealt with in literature. So again, it takes you back to literature. You have to go and read literature to be able to identify research gaps. Research gaps. We do our study so that we are able to fill research gaps. Okay? Now, when you have identified the research gaps, you can be in position to identify a problem. But again, there's some challenge there that a problem identified is never researchable unless it is formulated to become researchable. You can imagine this, that you might have even observed a problem at home, at the workplace, in society, but you cannot research that problem even when there are research gaps around it until when you formulate it to become researchable. And there are different approaches of formulating research problems. The other time I gave you one key one. One of the ways of formulating a research problem is to ask a question about it. You ask a question about the problem, then it becomes researchable. Researchable in the sense that the research you are going to conduct will now be to answer the question, to seek answers to that question that you have asked. Okay? And that means that problems without question are in most cases unresearchable. If a question has a problem has no question, then probably it means the solution to the problem is known. And so it may not warrant research. Okay? And the question you ask must also be able, you should be able to get some sensible answers to that question. There are some questions you may ask about a problem, and you may find that you cannot get any reasonable answer for that question. Then you cannot even research it. Now, I want to show you an example how to form a problem that you have identified into a research problem. Let's use this slide if you are seeing. My research field is child-focused research. Okay? My research area is violence against children in schools. I go and read as much as I can on violence against children in school. I read literature. Okay? Because what do I want to get from literature? I want to get research gaps. I want to get areas of knowledge which earlier scholars before me have not adequately addressed. That's why I go and read ably. And also when I read, I can get those gaps constitute my problem. I will get a problem out of it. Now see the example of a problem that I have identified. The research problem is there are increasing cases of violence in schools in Uganda, despite the measures put in place to address the issue. There are increasing cases of violence. That's how to state your problem. As brief as that, when they ask you, what is your problem? My problem is that cases of violence in schools are rising even when measures have been put to control those cases of violence. That is the problem that is bothering me. Now, for this problem to become a researchable issue, I need to ask a question about it, and I want to show you. You see, my main research question here. The first one is, what factors are associated with peer violence, victimization among primary school children in Uganda? This is one question on this problem of increasing cases of violence. That is a research of its own. And this question was investigated by some colleagues in Makerere from the College of Health Science, and they'll publish it in a good journal. That was the question they addressed. Another question: what is the nature, causes, and effects of school violence in Ugandan secondary schools? The problem is the same, violence against children, but the question here is, the researcher is asking, what is the nature, causes, and effects of school violence in Ugandan secondary schools? That's another study of its own on the same problem of increasing cases of violence. Question number 3: what are the negative effects of physical, sexual, and emotional violence on children's well-being and educational outcomes in northern Uganda? This is still a question on the same problem, increasing cases of violence. And even the last one, the drivers of violence against children in primary school in Uganda, is on the same problem, increasing cases of violence. By asking these questions, you are trying to refine what you then want to research on. That means on this one problem I have identified, increasing cases of violence, I have formulated 4 studies by asking these questions. 4 different studies that if I got funding and I was studying violence against children in school, I could recruit probably 4 master students to study with me. Each one of them will produce a dissertation in line with any of these questions. But these questions should not come from the blue. These questions must emerge from gaps, research gaps that you have been able to detect in literature. For example, I'm trying to give an example. For question number 1, the question was, what factors are associated with peer violence victimization among primary school children? Now, when I'm trying to point out the gaps, I can say little is known about what peer violence is, little is known about its causes, little is known about how peer violence victimization occurs among primary school children in Uganda. Now, if these are the research gaps, then that question I ask makes sense. I mean, this major question should not come from the blue. It should come from the gaps that have been able to identify. The second question is, what is the nature, causes, and effects of school violence in Uganda? When it comes to my gaps, you can see, while other scholars have researched about violence against children in different contexts, little is yet known about the forms of violence, the causes of the violence, and the effects of violence in schools in Uganda. Now, these are my research gaps. Now, when you go to, you see these gaps and you come to this question, you see the question is, what are the nature, causes, and effects of school violence in Ugandan secondary schools? So the question you ask on a problem must be in line with the research gaps that you want to fill. Not just any gaps, the gaps that you want to fill by conducting that study. So I have shown you an example of where you start from a field, you get a research area, you read widely about it, you identify a problem, and once you've identified the problem, you form it into a researchable problem by asking a question about it. Now, your business of research is to try and get answers to that question which you have asked. In this particular case, I'm asking major questions. Now, this major question is one major question, one study. One major question, one study. That's what I'm trying to show you. Okay? Now, from the major questions come the major objectives of the study. We are going to do it a little bit more later. But if my question is, what factors are associated with the peer violence victimization among primary school? My objective is, the purpose of this study is to establish the factors associated with peer violence victimization among. If I ask, what is the nature, causes, and effects of school violence in Ugandan secondary schools? The purpose of my study is to explore the nature, causes, and effects So the main question, it gives me my main objective of the study. Okay, it gives me that. Okay, but remember, the kind of questions you ask will uh, shape the study, whether it's going to be done qualitatively or quantitatively, because these paradigms of research, in them we answer specific kinds of questions. The why questions many times go more qualitative. Okay, the what questions tend to go more quantitative, but still it depends on how you ask that question. It will determine the kind of research that you are going to conduct. Okay. Now, the last time we had our seminar, I talked about how do we write the statement of the problem. And I gave, I think, more than 2 templates. But today I want to say you just may need to know 2 common approaches. The first approach, which we talked about in the last seminar, is what we can commonly refer to as the ideal reality consequences format, where you start by describing the ideal situation if there was no problem at all, and then you go to describe the actual situation, what is happening now. And then in step 3, you provide evidence of the intensity of the problem, how bad it is, or how widespread it is. Okay. And then in step 4, you point out the implications. If nothing is done, what may happen? Okay. Or if things are improved, what good things might happen? And later you point out what you are going to exactly explore in a given study. This is the commonest template we use for writing the statement of the problem. But I also mentioned this is an example of a statement of the problem I picked from the guidance for writing proposals and thesis for Kyambogo University. I used it the other time. I gave it to you. You have it. So you can get time and read it again at your own free time. Then this is another approach where we said, particularly for those who write their background statement, starting from the global to the local perspective. We call it the funnel shape approach to writing the problem statement. You may start from the known to the unknown, or from the broader to the narrower perspective, from the international to the national perspective or local perspective. Now, when you write your background statement like that, sometimes you may not go the other style. You may start your problem statement by writing again the broader problem, then you come to the narrower problem and show how much the problem is by some evidence, citing sources here and there. And then in step 1, you point out the general problem. In step 2, you bring in the specific problem. In step 3, you introduce what you want to study. Okay? I gave you this example of Bwisa. Bwisa is a Kenyan scholar, and he is the one who gave this example I cited from Bwisa. He gives the problem of brain drain in Kenya and the idea that he wanted to study how steward leadership style can reduce brain drain in the Lake Basin region of Kenya. And this is a good statement of the problem, but written in another approach, okay, starting from the broader problem to the narrower problem. Now, somebody would ask, which format is better than the other? Sometimes we recommend for an integrated approach, okay? An integrated approach where you pick from the other format and also from this. One thing you might notice from this format is that Bwisa even brings in the significance of the study. See the last sentence. The data to be gathered in this study may provide leaders with information relating to how they may address the problem of brain drain. Okay, that is the significance that it brings. Somebody may say, why? But take it to the section for significance. But it only reinforces and adds value to the statement of the problem. So even if you use the other first format, you can borrow from Bwisa's sample of the statement of the problem. Okay, so that is what we talked about the last time, and I don't know whether you managed to practice how to write your statement of the problem, because many times people really take long trying to learn how to write the statement of the problem. Okay, so colleagues, that's what we talked about the last seminar. Okay. Now today, our focus is on how do you formulate research questions and research objectives and hypotheses for a problem which you have been able to identify. Okay. This is what we are going to discuss basically this evening. But first, let's first just talk about what are objectives, what are research objectives, what are research questions, and what are research hypotheses before we go into how do you then derive them. Research objectives, as we all know, are the things which the researcher intends to accomplish by conducting a given study. Okay, they are the results of the expected results of a given study. Okay, and research objectives are normally divided into two broad categories. They are the general objectives and the specific objectives. Now, again, here sometimes we see some confusion because objectives sometimes are made hierarchical. Okay, like when you are studying organizational science, sometimes we say that the highest objective of an organization is its vision. Okay, then the second lowest level of an objective of an organization in its mission, and then you come to its goal, and then you come to aim, then and so on and so on. But that's not what we bring in this situation. Okay, general objectives or a general objective is the broad aim of the study, the overall aim of the study, the main reason why the researcher is conducting a study. Okay, and like we already saw in the other example I was trying to give, the main objective is the opposite of the main question which you are asking on the problem that you want to address. So it doesn't come from the blue. The main question you have asked on the problem gives you also your main study objective that you want to achieve. And normally the way we state them in non-measurable terms. Okay? They are not stated in a SMART form. SMART standing for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. We don't state them in SMART form like we do with the specific objectives. Okay. Now that means your general objective can be referred to as your purpose of the study or your aim of the study, and it is your general objective. Of course, there are some universities that bring some little bit of confusion. I know a university I was teaching in Uganda here, where they tell the student, state the aim of the study or state the purpose of the study. Then they'll say, state the general objective. And the student ends up duplicating because the aim of a study is actually its overall objective. It is its general objective. Okay, so those kind of guidelines for writing proposals normally bring confusion. Okay, the general objective is the aim, is the purpose. Okay, of a given study. Then there are specific. Okay, first before we go to the specific, when you are stating the aim of the study or the purpose, two things which are very important. One is you need to use action verbs to describe what action you want to study. Okay? For example, when we are studying research, we may want to determine a relationship. We may want to establish a relationship. We may want to describe something or compare something. And so the verb you use to describe your general objective must be very clear. Many times some people want to use to investigate again. The purpose of this study is to investigate. To investigate sometimes may be confused with to study. The word to investigate is the same as to study. So when you say the purpose of this study is to investigate, it's like you're saying the purpose of this study is to study. And we would still be asking, what exactly did you want to study? So choose appropriate verb. The other second thing is that in your purpose statement or general objective, you have to specify what exactly you are studying. Is it a relationship? Is it a difference? Is it a role? Is it an effect? Is it a description? You have to specify it well. If, for example, you wanted to find out the relationship between X and Y, and the word relationship does not appear in the statement, nobody will know what you are studying. Nobody will know. If, for example, you want to find out the relationship between age and performance, okay, in school, and you just said the purpose of this study is to establish, no, maybe you can say the purpose of this study is to find out. If you don't bring the word relationship there, nobody will know that you are studying relationship. Okay. Some people may want to say to find out the issues of age and this, but what issue is that you are talking about? If it is a relationship, if it is impact, if it is influence, you must specify it. And remember, objective should be contextualized. You study it in a particular context. So you need to write in such a way that we know where do you want to achieve whatever you want to achieve, where. Okay. And lastly, objectives are normally unifocus. Eh? So when we are writing research objectives, normally for every study, it is one objective. Although there are instances where you can talk about your research objective being twofold. Okay. And you will say, I first want to do this and then do that. But you should not continue breaking it again like it is specific objectives. No. Okay. They should be unifocus or bifocus, not so many things in one study. So if it is twofold, you even stated from the beginning, the purpose of this study is twofold. To do this, maybe you want to find out causes of violence against children in school and propose an intervention, something like that. Or propose a framework. Then they become two. General objective, not yet specific. General objective. So you need to know that the general objective is normally unifocus. Now here I have given examples of general objectives, but picking it from the problems I formulated earlier in the slide. I want this slide for you to use it for playing about with your own research area, with your own research problem and so on. Okay? To establish the factors associated with peer violence, to explore the nature. These general objectives are coming from the problem I identified, the problem of increasing cases of violence against children in schools in Uganda. Now, these are possible general objectives, meaning that these are 4 different studies 4 students can study on the same problem. Okay? That's why if you are 10 people in a PhD class, there would even be nothing wrong, all of you studying one problem. But studying one problem does not mean that you are duplicating each other. Not at all. Each one of you will have a question about the problem that is different from the other person's study. Like in this case, all these 4 questions are on the same problem, increasing cases of violence. But you can see they are not the same question. They are not exactly the same question. They are on different aspects of the problem of increasing cases of violence against children in school. Okay. Then there is the issue of the specific research objectives, which we are going to talk about. How do you derive them? Okay. And these are the precise accomplishment which the researcher intends to achieve by carrying out a given study. They emanate from the general objective. Okay. They are a breakdown of the general objective. And sometimes students get a lot of difficulties in deriving their research objectives. This is what we call research objectives. If you set the purpose, then we call these research objectives. Sometimes you see that the objectives are not in line with the general objective, and that becomes a problem. Now, the specific objective must be SMART. Okay, all of us agree that must be SMART. Okay, again, in stating them, remember the verbs, the action verb to use, and remember the specific problem or issue you want to study. Is it a relationship? Is it an effect? Now, if your general objective is to find out a relationship between something and something, then your specific objectives cannot change to impact, to influence, to contribution, when the general objective has already stated clearly that you want to find a relationship between age and performance. Your specific objective must remain on relationship. Okay? And even the verbs you are going to use to describe your specific objective must be related. They may not be a duplication of the same verb, but they must be related. Okay? You don't just change them as you wish. Okay? Next are research questions. A research question ordinarily would be looked at as the question that a research project sets out to answer. Is what we call the research question. Now, if you remember the way I talked about formulating a research problem, we normally formulate a research problem by asking a main research question, a major research question, which gives you also your purpose of the study, which gives you your objectives of the study. But there are also sub-questions which you can later generate. The sub-questions we generate may be the opposite directly of the objectives, or they may be different slightly. You can have one sub-objective, but with two questions emanating out of it. But even if they are exactly the opposite of each other, there is really nothing wrong with it. We are going to talk about how do you derive the questions and how do you derive the objectives. Remember, your questions must be focused. They should be ordered in a logical sequence. They should be realistic and in line with the objectives, in line with the problem. Okay? In line with the problem. These characteristics of the questions are also the same characteristics of the objectives that you should be able to generate. Focused, ordered, realistic, operational, and measurable in nature. For example, the same objectives, main general objective which I identified up there, here now have been able to turn them into questions. The other time I gave them as objectives. Here now they are questions, but they are main questions, not sub questions, not specific questions. They are main questions in line with the general objectives I talked about. Okay. Now, in all the researches that we do, research questions and objectives help guide us in the process of conducting the study. Okay. Research questions can be used together with the objectives. Okay. But in a scenario where the question is the opposite of the objective, if you are writing, for example, a scholarly paper, then you don't need both because they will simply be referring to the same thing. The objective tells us what you want to achieve. The questions guide us on the problem scenario that you wanted answers to. Okay, so you don't need both sometimes because they may be talking about the same thing. The next thing is hypothesis. That an hypothesis is a statement or a prediction of an expected relationship between two or more factors. Okay, and the problem under study, which can be tested. An hypothesis is a tentative answer to a research question. If you ask a question like, let me go back to these main questions, for instance, now. Okay. I don't see a very good question here, but we are going to go to the questions later and you'll see if you is there a relationship between age and performance in school? The answer can be yes, there is a significant relationship between age and performance of students in school. Now, that statement of there is a significant relationship is some kind of a guess if you have not yet collected data. But it is a guess of the answer to the question, is there any relationship? Okay, or what is the relationship between age and performance? Then say that there is a significant positive relationship between age and performance. That tentative answer which you provide is called an hypothesis. Okay, it's called an hypothesis, and we know all this. The good thing is that we know all this. We have hypotheses that we set before we conduct a study, and we can the research hypothesis is stated prior to the conduct of the research, while the statistical hypothesis is stated after the conduct of research when you are testing the hypothesis. Okay, now this can be in null form, where you are saying that there's no relationship or there's no effect between the variables, or it can be the alternative statistical hypothesis, where you say that yes, there is a relationship between these variables. Hypotheses, therefore, then come from questions, because they are tentative answers to research questions. They don't come from the blue, they come from the questions. And the questions, as I said, they are linked to the objectives. Actually, questions should come first before objectives. Okay? Questions should come first, then the objectives will come, and then the hypothesis will also come, because they are related. Okay? Your hypothesis should be testable. It should be testable and clear and precise. Okay? But remember, not all studies go with hypothesis. It's only when you are able. If you're doing an exploratory study where there are no possible answers you have to say that this is related with that, then you have to remain with questions. You don't need to generate an hypothesis. I see time is running so fast. Colleagues, I will want to go to the point of today. How do you then derive research questions or hypotheses in a study of your own choice? I want to say that there are many approaches to deriving objectives and questions and hypotheses. The first one, we could normally call it many-to-one model, where you look at the variable. If, for instance, you are studying two variables, you look at your independent variable. I've put them as IVs. You look at its dimensions, its different aspects, and you pick each aspect and link it to the dependent variable. Then we are saying you are using the many-to-one approach. I want to give an example here. Our research area remains the same. Our research problem remains the same, increasing cases of violence. Now, see our main research question. What are the negative effects of violence on children's well-being and educational outcomes in northern Uganda? Now, the purpose is to establish the negative effects of violence on children's well-being. Now, when it comes to using the many-to-one to get the research objectives, look at the column on research objectives. I've been able to derive 3. Why 3? Because I broke the violence into different types. Actually, here I should have adjusted. Look at it. The first one is, what are the negative effects of physical violence? That comma should not be there. On children's well-being and educational outcomes. What are the effects of sexual violence? And because I've broken violence into different aspects, and I'm linking it to the DVs. Now, the way the research question is brings in the objectives and will also bring in the hypothesis. The 3 things are actually sides of the same coin. But here, the approach to deriving the questions and the hypothesis and the objectives is according to many-to-one. Aspects of the IV broken down into parts linked to the DV. The second approach is the one-to-many approach. The one-to-many approach, where you break the DV instead and link each aspect. You link the IV to different aspects of the DV. Let's see this example. Remember, look at the question. What are the negative effects of violence on children's well-being and educational outcomes in northern Uganda? Here, the dependent variables are 2. One, well-being, and the other one, educational outcomes. So if I want to develop my research objectives or questions using the one-to-many approach, I don't need to bother. The first objective will be on well-being. I show what are the negative effects of violence on the well-being of children. And the second one is, what are the negative effects of violence on the educational outcomes, because there are those 2. Now, those will also make my questions, those will also make my objectives and hypothesis. Actually, here, I broke down both sides. I left the physical, the sexual, and the emotional, which was not necessary. I should have just put, what are the negative effects of violence on children's well-being, and what are the negative effects of violence on educational outcomes, without bringing in the breakdown of the other one, because I want to have only 2 objectives. Now, that is one-to-many approach. The next one is the many-to-many approach, where you break all sides. Like in our case, the upper one. Remember, there are two DVs. Children's well-being and educational outcomes are dependent variables. And then violence is the independent variable. But violence can be broken down into three parts: physical violence, sexual violence, and emotional violence. That conceptualization, you get it from literature. So, like in this example, if you look at it, there are now 5 specific objectives. Why? Because I have an objective linking physical violence to welfare. Then I have an objective linking physical violence to educational outcomes. Then another objective for sexual violence to welfare. Then sexual violence to educational outcomes. Then social violence to welfare. Then no, emotional violence. Then emotional violence. So because there are 3 aspects of violence I have derived, and there are 2 dependent variables, I need 5 specific objectives. You can imagine. This is the same study, but with different formats of developing my objectives, because I'm using different approaches to derive them. Okay. Then we have a common model called the open-ended model, where you don't break the variables. You logically derive questions about the problem from different angles or from different perspectives. So you don't need to break the variables. For example, you remember I pointed on the area of violence. I asked one question: what are the nature, causes, and effects of school violence in schools in Uganda? Now, in that question, my objective will be to explore the nature, causes, and effects of school violence. Now, when it comes to my research questions and objectives, I don't break any variable. I just say, what is the nature of school violence? I look at nature. In the general objective, remember? The second question is on causes. The third question is on effects. I've not broken any variable. Now, one thing that has happened in this example I brought, you will notice that what is objective number 1 and question number 1 does not have an hypothesis. Why? Because they have nothing to do with relationship between variables or effect, which are what hypotheses are. So the question, what is the nature of school violence in Uganda? The objective is to analyze the nature of school violence in Uganda. There's no hypothesis for it. The second objective, what are the causes of school violence in Uganda? The objective is to find out the causes of school violence in Uganda. No hypothesis for it. And the last one, what are the effects of violence on learners and teachers in Uganda? Now, the objective is to establish the effects. But here there is an hypothesis that violence has a significant effect on learners and teachers. This one, you need to test it after collecting the data. So when you formulate your research objective in this manner, you can see you will have a study of 3 questions, 3 objectives, and 1 hypothesis. Because you are not breaking the variables like in the first case. And then we have a scenario where sometimes we are studying mediation. Okay? You're studying mediation between this and that. Now let's assume you want to find out the effect of something, the IV on the DV, but you have mediating variables in between. Now you should know that every arrow you see there becomes a specific objective. Every arrow that you see there, arrow between IV and MV1 is an objective. Between MV1 and DV is another objective, and so on and so on. So if I want to show you an example here, same problem, but I've changed the question a bit. Look at my question. What are the mediating effects of drug abuse and peer pressure on the relationship between school violence and the educational outcomes of secondary school children in northern Uganda? The general objective of this study is to explore the mediating effects of drug abuse, and peer pressure, because the general objective is the answer to the main question. But now, when it comes to the specific objectives, as I said, every arrow is an objective. What is the relationship between school violence and peer pressure? What is the relationship between school violence and cases of drug abuse? What is the relationship between peer pressure and educational? If you go back to the diagram there, what you could even consider like your conceptual framework, you'll find that these questions are relating to those arrows. And they can all be turned into objectives and as well hypotheses. Here you are using a model of the mediation effect of variables. Okay. The last one, colleagues, a situation where you want to generate your objectives, but you want to link it to a theory which is guiding you to conduct that study. I've called it theory-led approach to deriving objectives. Okay. In theory-led studies, objectives can be derived based on the principles of the theory. Okay. If, for example, we have had a student in Makerere from Tanzania who studied the integration of ICT in primary teachers colleges, how the lecturers of primary teachers colleges in Tanzania are using ICT. And he was testing the theory of planned behavior, that people adopt new technologies to use in a rational manner. Now, that theory of planned behavior has got about 6 or 7 elements that for people to adopt new technology, it depends on their perceived, perceived benefits or perceived needs, or about 6 different elements. Now, in that kind of situation, each element of the theory is linked to what you are studying. Like for him, he was studying the integration of ICT in teaching and learning in the primary teachers colleges. So each element of the theory becomes an objective. For example, you may want to find out the perceived benefits of ICT and how it is related to the integration of ICT in teaching and learning among the lecturers of primary teachers colleges. Then you go to another variable, then you go to another variable. So the objectives come from the theory. If you have a theory with 6 elements or 10 elements, then you may not need to study all. You have to select which elements of the theory will be brought into your research objective. So you can also create your objectives on the basis of your theory that you are using. But even when you create these objectives basing on your theory, it will still look like either it is many to one or one to many. It will go back to the other approaches we have talked about. Okay? If the theory is like the IV, then you will have many to one. If the theory is like guiding you from the DV side, then it will look like it is one to many. Okay? So those are the different approaches that we use commonly to derive the research questions and the research objectives and hypotheses of our studies. We don't use hypotheses all the time in all studies. No, it depends on whether they are you can derive tentative answers to your research questions based on literature. If it is an exploratory study which you do not have any evidence of relationship and all that, you don't concoct those hypotheses. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking alone. I did not hear any voice, not even a child crying behind where you are seated. I want to say I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I want those of you who have listened to me, particularly the students, or those who are planning their research project, to reflect on these questions. Basing on your proposed research project, indicate your broad research area. Some students do us a lot of injustice. Even after talking like this, the person will behave like he or she does not know what a research area is. I gave the example here that my broad research area is child-focused research. My specific research area is violence against children in schools. That is my specific research area, violence against children in school. What is your research problem? My problem is increasing cases of violence against children in schools. There are increasing cases. Now, that problem, if you are teaching in a secondary school in Uganda, you can even observe it. You can notice it. But you cannot research it unless you have evidence that it has never been addressed. Okay? Now, what is your research problem? Then the question is, what are your research gaps? Meaning that even if you have noticed a problem, you have to read a lot for you to be able to say, yes, the problem of violence against children, the areas which have not been addressed are the following and the following. Now that leads you to asking a question which you can study about. So what is your research, your main research question? Because when you formulate a main research question, then the problem becomes refined for research. And remember, your main research question gives us the aim of your research. Okay, once you state the main research question, we already know your purpose of the study. Then state your specific research objectives, which you have to derive from the main research objective. But you cannot have less than 2 specific research objectives. Somebody may ask, then how many should I have? There may not be any rule of thumb about it, but 5 research objectives or 4 research objectives to probably 8 looks manageable for PhD studies. But I've seen in some cases, in our sister school in MOOCs, students have 10 objectives, some have 12 specific objectives. But of course, they don't do justice to it because it requires a lot of work. The more the objectives are, a lot of work will be expected of it. So can you, when you retreat back to your room tomorrow, answer these questions to yourself as honestly as possible before you probably go to a supervisor? Do you know your research area? Do you know your problem? Have you identified the problem? Can you state the statement of the problem? Can you derive sensibly using any possible approach appropriate questions, objectives, and hypotheses? I want to say thank you so much for listening to me. Are you guys there? Hello? Haven't you left me alone?
You're not left alone, sir. We could hear you clearly loud.
I've been worried because the silence is too much. And you know, this studies, this teaching without seeing the faces, the beautiful faces of the students is not nice. So I want to say I am coming to the end and I want to listen to you people, at least some little comments before we come to the end. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much. We had to do the silencing so that we have a well coordinated seminar. So that was
the network is a bit faint.
Oh, can you hear me clearly now?
Yes, it's better. Can we attract questions now? There are questions in the chat. Hello? 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 Why is everybody quiet? Hello? Oh, I'm muted. Oh. Some. Yes, come. Where?
Hello, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, we heard you clearly.
Thank you, thank you. So, can I get some questions or some comments or some experience? Oh, I see there are so many hands here.
Yes, I think the host muted everybody. That is why there was no noise. I will enjoy the seminar now. Everybody now is unmuted, so you can now hear people now. Over to the anchor. Thank you.
I want them to, you release the guys who open their microphone so that we can talk. Hello, the secretariat?
Okay.
Secretariat?
Anchor, can you
Yes,
answer the presenter?
yes, I want them to open for us to talk.
Okay, that will be done shortly. Yes, that will be done shortly.
Okay, okay, okay. Hello? Secretariat?
Hello?
Yes, please. I
Yes.
want the participants to talk.
Okay, they
I
will talk
see
now.
Kennedy. Kennedy is there?
Oh, yeah, what's
Kennedy? Kennedy? I see the hands of Justin up. Justin? Hello? But people are not talking. Hmm? Yeah? No. Hello? So why are people not talking?
I think you can hear me. Sorry, my sound
Yes, madam.
yes. So I think it's better now.
Can you let people talk?
All right. So we will take the questions in the order which the
You help me coordinate.
yes. So I'm going to go for the first question I can see now. That's
Questions?
yes. We are going to
Sir, hello, sir.
Yes, please.
I'm Yusuf from Zampro State of Nigeria, sir.
Welcome, Yusuf.
This is a wonderful presentation, which is absolutely sensational and fantastic, sir. We are so
Thank
much
you so.
grateful, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so. Thank you, Yusuf.
Yes, sir. So I have a question.
Please ask.
Hello, sir.
Yes, please ask the question. Ask the question.
Okay, concerning about the issue, can I come up with five and above, let's say 6 objectives and 6 research questions at the same time on a particular research?
Yes, Yusuf, that's what I said. That it is possible to have 6 objectives. You can have 7 objectives, but that means that
Okay,
the
sir.
workload has increased because you have to
Okay, sir.
review
Thank you so
literature.
much.
Yes, you have to review literature on the basis of every objective. And remember
Okay.
that those objectives should have emanated from the research gaps.
Okay, sir.
They
Thank
should
you
come
so
from
much
the
and God
research.
bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a
Nice to
pleasure.
meet you and God
Thank
bless you and
you.
your family, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
all right. Thank you so much, sir. I think it got clarity. So I'm going to call the next
From
person,
Kabina.
which is Akudo
All right,
Kennedy.
thank you, sir. I've just been unmuted.
You have. Go ahead. We can hear you.
It's all right. Thank you very much, the presenter, for that very illuminating presentation. My question
Thank you.
is just very simple. Why don't we use hypotheses in a qualitative research? That is my question, sir.
Okay. Now, I can try and answer that. Like we said, qualitative hypothesis. Okay, we said hypothesis are tentative answers that state relationship between two or more variables. There are a few qualitative researchers who have been attempting to test hypotheses, but of course, you know that the results for hypothesis testing normally are expressed more quantitatively. So those who do qualitative researches cannot do those tests. Are you getting my point?
Exactly,
But there are qualitative researchers who have been trying to generate hypotheses, but of course they cannot produce the results in a statistical manner the way those who are quantitative by nature can produce. Can I get the experience of somebody who might have tried to use hypotheses in a qualitative study?
I only experienced that of a mixed method, sir.
Yeah, in mixed method, that's very okay. In mixed method, that's okay because it has a quantitative part and then it has the qualitative part. So you are right. You are right.
It's okay,
Kennedy?
sir. I'm okay.
Thank you. Thank you
I'm
so
okay,
much.
sir.
Oh, it's okay. Kennedy?
Yes,
I
sir.
said Dr. Kennedy. Oh, you are the one who have been talking.
Oh, yeah, you just responded to him already. So let me call on the next
Then
person.
Christiana,
Maybe.
Dr. Christiana, Dr. Christiana. Doctor, you want to talk? I also see Mohammed.
Yes, there is a lot of questions. Let's just call them in the sequence.
Yes, please let them talk.
All right, so I have Matthew Ogunbero. Please go ahead with your question. You'd have to unmute yourself, please.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Evening.
Is that Aggie talking?
Yes, it's Aggie talking.
Yes,
Okay.
Aggie, welcome.
Thank you.
Doctor, for this wonderful presentation. In fact, it's an eye-opening, and it has shed a lot of light to what we are doing as a researcher. Of course, we are.
Okay.
We appreciate that.
Thank you. Is that Mohammed talking?
No, Ogunbero Matthew is talking.
Okay.
Doctor, on personal notes, I would like to have your number, especially your WhatsApp number, so that I will engage you in my own personal research.
Yes. Let me put it in the chat.
Okay, I will.
Yes.
Okay, we'll get that across to you. Thank you.
Compliance to NDPR.
Okay, just to comply with NDPR, so we don't get your information in the space out there. So let's get it across to him. I think it's better for a safe privacy, data privacy thing. Thank you. So let me call on the next person, which is Dr. Ijeoma Awakalu. Please go ahead with your question or your addition. Dr. Ijeoma Awakalu.
Aggie has never talked. Aggie. And Dr. Ijeoma. Dr. Ijeoma.
Okay, let me. Dr. Ijeoma, please go ahead with your question. You have to unmute your mic. Okay, while we wait for her, I think we should allow Dr. Adi to speak.
I can see Alice also. Dr. Alice. Dr. Alice. Anijoma should be my friend. This one I know.
Dr. Ijoma, please, you have to unmute yourself so we can.
Dr. Ijoma, I know her. Doctor? Dr. Ijoma?
Please
talk.
Go
ahead and talk. She has gone off.
She has network. Yes, it seems a bit of a network issue.
It may be a network problem. It may be a network problem.
Let's go with the next question, please. Naka Alice, please go ahead with your question. You have to unmute your mic, please.
Yeah, let anybody talk. A comment, a question, or something like that.
Okay, so if you're having difficulty so we can hear you, you can drop a chat so we can also read through what you have to say. But everyone can unmute and let's have your contribution.
Dr. David, I have one more question, sir. Dr. David, can I go ahead with my question, sir?
Doctor, please unmute yourself.
Yes, I have. Hello, you go ahead. I was questioning you that you don't ask me a very hard question.
Are you still here?
Yes, I am here.
One more question, doctor.
Please ask.
Okay, do we have a maximum number of research questions or a study?
I try to explain that there is no rule of thumb that stops somebody from having 6 or 7 objectives or questions.
Question,
the problem is that the more objectives you have, the bigger the workload for that research. Okay? But in terms of the smallest number of objectives you need to have, the smallest is 2. Okay? But in terms of the largest number, there's no rule of thumb. Of course, I've ever seen students with 7, the PhD students with 7, we have passed them. Some with 2, we have also passed them. Now, if somebody wants to study 10 objectives, you know that somebody is going to do a shoddy job. Are you getting the point? So on average, many of our students normally have 5. For the PhD, many of them tend to have 5. If they have broken down the variables a lot, they tend to have 5. But the number of objectives should really come from your conceptualization of the variables. You cannot sometimes forge them. If we said many to one, one to many, many to many, you may not forge them. The way you have conceptualized the research variables will determine how many objectives you are likely going to have.
It's okay because there's a study I'm working on currently. It has three levels of independent variables and 3 dependent variables. 3 levels of independent variables and 3 dependent variables. So I ran into 12 research questions. Is that too much, sir?
You can have 9.
I can have 9.
You can have 9. Yes, you can link the variables. Each IV goes to.
There are moderators, sir.
There are also moderators.
Yes, I have 2 moderators. Yes.
The challenge is, colleague, if the variables become many, sometimes it is difficult to control unless you are able to get concepts which cover the variables. But if the variables are to be studied independently, then you may not reduce the number of objectives so much.
It's okay.
Yes. So are you using many to many? Not so?
one to many.
One to many.
Yes.
Yeah, but if the IVs are 3, then they become many to many. Because each IV
Okay,
is also
many to many.
many to many, yes. Many to many.
The IV is 1, but about 3 to 4 levels. That is three experimental and 1 control.
Okay.
The IV is just it deals with strategies, 3 different strategies with a control. So it's just 1 IV with 3 levels.
Then in that case, I would suggest that you don't now break the IV. You better have 1 to many.
Yes, 1 to many. Yes, that is what
You have 1 to many. Yes, you have 1 to many. Yeah,
so it
1 to
ran
many.
into 12 research questions and 7 hypotheses.
Oh dear, because the moderator variables are also there, because every line there will be an objective.
Because there will be interactions, so I also check for the interactions.
Exactly. I just wish you the very best. Just wish you the very best. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we should take Dr. Hagi before we go to the questions in the chat. Then we come back to the people raising their electronic hands. So Dr. Hagi, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am. We can hear.
Yes, so Dr. Ones, good evening.
Good evening, dear.
Thanks for this great presentation.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
So wonderful. In fact, you have really clarified many issues today. These several approaches, 1 to many, many to 1, and so on and so forth. But there's something I want to get clear. You know, I came in very late and I saw a slide. Maybe if you can project your slide on research questions. I want to ask a question there.
On research questions?
Yes, there were some research questions that you projected at the point I joined. So
I had many of them and I was like repeating. I don't know which research questions. Like this one?
No, the next one. Let me see. The next one. What I wanted to find out is that sometimes you have more than 1 or 2 variables. I saw that one. That one had so many 2 or 3 variables on just one. On one.
Yes, this one. Yes, this particular one. This particular one was, what are the effects of violence on children's well-being and educational outcomes? You see that the dependent variables are 2.
Yes.
Yes.
And then 1 independent variable.
Exactly. No,
so
1.
In such a case, we used to think that that research question is loaded.
That is true.
That is loaded, and when you begin to go to the instrument and you develop instrument, it may not be answering all the questions, answering all the questions you are raising in this one research question.
Sure.
So when an item, an objective or a research question is loaded like that, how do we handle it? And then the second one is this. You were asking of maybe quantify. Somebody asked about quantifying qualitative research. There was a question like that. In fact, I had interference calls were coming. And I used to know that even if you have a qualitative research, there's a way to convert it in such a way that you can qualify the data and do your analysis. In such a case, if you are able to qualify the data you have on the qualitative research, can't we go ahead to to state hypotheses and test hypotheses on such ones?
And doctor, let me start with that.
Okay.
Sometimes we do interview survey. We interview a large number of people.
Yes.
And sometimes when you tell people I'm going to use interview, then somebody imagine this is already qualitative research. But in the actual sense, data from interview survey can be quantified.
Can be quantified, yes.
Very much, it can be quantified. Now, if you quantify it, then you can test an hypothesis using quantitative data. You're getting that? That one
So
is very
there's
possible.
room for that.
There's room, yes,
Okay.
there's room. Yes, there's
Okay.
room. Yes,
Okay.
you can collect data through interview, but still can go quantitative in analysis.
Okay.
Of course, the qualitative researchers will say you are losing so much flesh of data because the quantitative data will just be scores of 2, 3, 4, 5, and all that. But even if you lose it, you can still translate it into quantitative results,
Yes.
and you
Yes.
can test hypothesis.
Yes, is that translation I was
Now,
talking about.
the other point you have raised here is also very critical.
Yes.
Remember, we said that a good question or objective should be smart, and being smart is a specific, measurable, attainable, and realistic. Now,
Yes.
when you say you have two DVs, like in this case, children's well-being and educational outcomes, you want to
Yes.
find out the effects of violence on the two, then it
On
is
the
no longer very specific.
Yes.
It is dual in any way. It is dual. Now, when you go to the tool or the instrument, you will
Yes.
find that you cannot ask one question that covers the two at once.
At all.
You have to ask questions on well-being alone and ask questions on educational outcomes alone.
Okay.
Yes, so even when it comes to analysis, the best way to analyze it would be to look at the effects of violence on well-being alone and look at the effects of violence on educational outcomes alone.
Okay.
That would be the best way to analyze the data.
Okay, so that one is allowed. So we
Yes,
should
it
not
is. It is.
we should no longer regard such questions as loaded.
No, it will not make it specific. Yeah.
Okay.
But of course, you can state your objectives the way I have stated down. It is not wrong, but it is not very specific because you are combining two variables for the DV.
Yes, yes.
Yes, that's the challenge. That's the challenge.
It's like violating one of the rules. That's why.
Exactly. That is true. That's very true, doctor. That's very true, doctor. But we should encourage, if a student does this, when it comes to data presentation, you should not now lump well-being and educational outcome. You should not lump them together.
Okay.
Yes, you should present for us the results, violence on well-being alone and violence on educational outcomes alone for the same one objective.
Okay. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes, exactly. Otherwise, thank you so much.
We will need your slides, please, Doc.
Yes, please. Yes, please. We are
you.
going to share the slide. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for the sharing.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I think before we proceed on to the questions, to the people raising their hands, let's take some questions from the chat. So I'm going to read a cluster of them.
I see my colleague, Dr. Jessica there. Jessica, where are you? Dr. Kabasita there. Dr. Kabasita, I see your hand up.
Yes, doctor.
Please talk.
Thank you so much for Thank you so much, doctor, for the presentation.
Thank you. The network is getting bad. Network.
My question is on the objection and one-to-many kind of drafting the objectives.
One to many. Oh, the network is so bad. Doctor, your network is so bad.
Yes.
Yes. Now it's better.
Many-to-many and one-to-many kind of framework.
Yes.
For trying to design objectives. The study
Yes.
should have, Doctor, that
Yes.
you talked of, and by that the study should have IVs and DVs.
Doctor, the network has not been good.
I think we
But
should
now
come
my
back
question
to
comes
us.
as one dependent variable. COVID-19 outbreak in Uganda. Is it clear now?
It's better
Not
now.
very clear, ma. Not very clear. So I guess the other alternative is to drop your question as a chat. We'll read it out to him and then we'll be able to respond to that.
Yeah. You can drop it in the chat.
That's a better alternative, please.
All right, thank
All
you,
right,
Doctor.
I think while she's doing that, we quickly read out some of the questions from the chat already. Then we'll come back to the people that would like to ask theirs verbally. So I have this question from Dr. Mrs. Caroline. Okay, I think I'm going to respond. She's asking for the slide. We'll get back to. So let me get to the question from Ayeku Shenyi Ayodele. Can we use both research question and hypothesis on a thesis? Can we use both research question and hypothesis on a thesis?
And Doctor, I want to say yes, you can use both questions and hypothesis. Can I show you the example? Can I show you the example?
Please go ahead, sir.
Do you see this example I gave? The purpose of this study is to explore the nature, causes, and effects of school violence in schools in Uganda. Now, there are three objectives. One is on nature, one is on causes, one is on effect. Now, the first two objectives are on one variable only. Those ones don't need hypothesis. You cannot use hypothesis on them. Now, the last objective, which is talking about effects of violence on the teachers and on the learners, that one attracts an hypothesis. So you can see I have three objectives, three questions, but I have only one objective. Can you imagine that? So it is possible to have questions and hypotheses in the same study. For mixed studies, we normally have parts which are quantitative and they will normally attract hypotheses, and parts which are normally qualitative and they won't attract hypotheses. They remain guided by research questions. So it is possible to have both questions and hypotheses in the same study. Does that answer the question?
I
Hello?
figured the person got the clarity.
Yes.
I'm with you.
Yes.
So I figured the person got the clarity. So if there is any other this thing, there would be a follow back on that. Let me quickly take those questions together from Mohammed and from Bukola, which says, which is better to use the IV/DV, one to many or many to one? Then from Bukola says, sir, what is the meaning of IV/DV?
The first question is, which approach is more preferred? Is it many to one or one to many? And I want to answer like this. the approach where you break down the IV, the independent variable, into different elements and you link it to the DV is the most preferred. Why do I say this? Your independent variable is also called the explanatory variable. It is the variable which you either want to manipulate and study how it impacts on the dependent variable. So it is the explanatory variable. And most times it would be more ideal to look at its different aspects, linking it to the dependent variable. So the most preferred approach would be breaking down the independent variable, have them many parts, and then you link them to the dependent variable. So the most preferred is many to one approach. Okay. I don't know, the second question, I didn't get exactly what it was. Madam, what were you saying? What was the second question? Okay, I've seen another question here. I've seen another question. What about a study with one variable? A study with one variable is possible. It happens. We do it. We do it. Sometimes other scholars blame it that it may not be as significant as the one with more than one variable. But we can have a study of one variable. For example, if you want to find out the profile of street vendors in Kampala, the purpose of your study is to establish the profile of street vendors in Kampala, or the management of street vendors in Kampala. That is a one variable study. There are no two variables that one links to that. No, you either want to find the management or you want to find the profiles of street vendors. So you may want to go to the field to find out how many street vendors are there by sex or by gender or by regions where they come from, by their level of education. And that's a one variable study. That's a one variable study. Okay. So it is possible to have a study of one variable. Another question?
Yes, there is Christopher Wagima.
Yes, Christopher.
Yes, thank you very much, Doctor. Can you hear?
Yes,
can
please.
You hear me?
Very clear.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm Christopher from Uganda.
Oh, thank you.
Indeed, I appreciate Doctor for the presentation.
Thank you.
I'm just a candidate PhD Makerere Moops. I want to on my research title. So I just wanted the clarity. How many variables should a PhD candidate have in the research title? Then the other issue is when you talked about the action verbs, how can I be able to feasibly utilize the action verbs appropriately? For example, how will I say that this would require a call for establishing or to investigate or to find out? And then the last one is on a hypothesis. How can I feasibly be able to understand that my topic would call for either two hypotheses or one hypothesis, looking at just the topic that of study. Thank you very much, Doctor, and I'll be grateful to share with you my information for further guidance.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for the compliment and for the question. Now, The question, how many variables should a PhD student study? I can tell you that that kind of question doesn't have an appropriate answer. Every study needs a clearly defined research problem. And I've always been talking about this. It is a very critical matter. Students do not know their research problems because those variables or concepts are used to describe problems, research problems that we investigate. So if you like this example I gave, that there is increasing violence in schools in Uganda, assuming you start saying how does family background or how does the family related factors and school related factors impact on cases of violence in schools in Uganda. Let's assume you did that. Then you can see you have increased the variables. Family related factor become a variable, school related factors become a variable, cases of violence become a variable. You have three. Now, if you start saying, what about the media? What's the role of the media on violence in school? Then you become with four variables. The more questions you ask, the more refined your study becomes, but also it will show us how big that study is or how small it is. So the number of variables depend on the kind of question you are asking. I wish by the end of this discussion, everybody who has attended will know how to state his problem as briefly as I've stated. That what is the problem in this research? That the number of cases of violence against children are on the rise in the school. That is the problem. So what do you want to study? That I want to study the nature, causes, and effects of violence, or I want to study this, and in a simple way, you can't take long to formulate.
Okay.
The action verbs, definitely you have to think around it. You have to think around it. There are instances when you may need to use the word to explore. But an exploration is an investigation into a field which is not heavily researched yet. A field which shows deficiency in literature. Then you can say you want to explore. But if in the literature section you are writing that several studies have already been done in this field and so on, and then you say the purpose of your study is to explore, then you are using a wrong verb. You cannot explore an area heavily researched. We explore virgin areas. So before you use to explore, to establish, to find out, to analyze, to examine, you must think about what does this verb really imply. It is important. It is important. And I know sometimes students take it very lightly. They just use any word. Objective 1, analyze something. Objective 2 uses establish. But you may find that the actions don't rhyme with the general objective that you are trying to establish. So you need to take care of that. Okay? Then the hypothesis, as I said, the hypothesis will be very closely related to the questions you are asking, because hypotheses are tentative answers to questions. Now, if you are asking questions in an exploratory study, then you cannot generate hypotheses for it. They have to remain questions. But if you are generating hypotheses and literature informs you that there are potential relationships between this and that, then you have to go ahead and formulate the hypothesis. And the way you formulate the questions and the objectives will determine whether you will have an hypothesis or not. That's why this particular slide, I've left it here. You see my questions, you see my objectives, but you see I only have one hypothesis because the other two objectives don't warrant the formulation of an hypothesis. So you need to think through all this.
Thank you so much, sir. So I have a question from Dr. Jessica already sent in. She said, thanks, Dr. Onen, for the presentation. With a many-to-many, one-to-many objective formulation framework, IV and DV are implied. How about a study with one variable? For example, a topic like COVID-19 breakout in Uganda. A higher institution of learning perspective. Thank you. Did you get that, sir?
Yes, I got it. I got it. I even tried to answer it that it is possible to study one variable. It is possible to study one variable. Okay?
Oh.
And when you are studying one variable, then you are most likely going to use the open-ended model to derive your objectives. You look at the different aspects of that variable, and then you ask questions on each part, and they will make up your objective. Like I gave the example of studying street vendors in Kampala, and you are looking at the regions where they come from. You're looking at a question on their age distribution. You're looking at their gender distribution, something like that. You look at the variable is profile, but profile being broken down, what is the distribution of the vendors by age? What is the distribution of vendors by region where they come from? What is the, and so on and so on. But those different aspects are referring to profile, that one variable. So in short, you are still like using many, but it is no longer many to many because there's only one variable. Okay. So Jessica, it is still possible to conduct a study of one variable. Although I started from two. Yes, I started from two. I see
Thank you so
a
much,
question
sir.
or a comment from a colleague, Rosemary Uyolo.
Okay.
And Rosemary is saying, she said something. What did
My
Rosemary
study
say?
is comparing teacher knowledge and practices in curriculum implementation. I'm basing it on the KAP model. Do I include attitude in the theoretical framework or not? Attitude does not feature in my research title.
But she's using the CAP model. The CAP model is a model of studying relationship between knowledge, attitude, and practices towards something. So I think if she's not going to study attitude, then maybe she's not using the CAP model. Otherwise, the CAP model of inquiry applies knowledge, attitude, and practices towards something that people do.
All right. Thank you so much. So let me take this last question from Edward. Yes. Edward says, when it comes to research gap, how do you tell that little is known about a research problem? Someone will reason you out saying you have simply not read enough about it. I'm not sure you got that.
Yes,
Did you get that?
I got the question. Actually, the point is, is that academia is a very complicated field, a very slippery field. Okay, if you say little research has been done in this area or little is known about this, somebody said you have not researched enough for literature. That's why you are referring to the studies in this field as little. Okay, but in my first slide on what is a research problem, people have looked at research problems in different aspects, including little research in a field, including little knowledge about something. So if you're referring to the research gap, the gap here is that little is known about this. You must try to appear convincing, that you're convincing people that yes, not much has been done about it. But of course, those challenges from Edward will always be there. Okay? Your questions must come from those gaps. And those gaps are really shown in terms of knowledge gaps. Other scholars have not dealt with that aspect of the problem which you want to deal with. That is what becomes a knowledge gap. So knowledge gaps are got from literature. And so if you say little has been done about this, you show example. You can say so and so did this and say that and that, another one did this, but this particular point has not been raised. So demonstrate that, yes, you have read. And when you say little has been done here, you have evidence that you can defend yourself. Okay.
Yeah. Doctor, thank you so much. I see people keep raising the hands. Maybe I should just take one more question and then we'll wrap this up tonight from Oyetuji Bemisola Comfort.
Are you sure that?
Take as the last question for the night.
Okay,
Please
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm happy about the participation, by the way, but except we have taken so long a time. But I'm happy about the participation. The last question?
Yes, please unmute yourself, please. Bemisola Comfort Oyetuji.
The person is not talking.
No.
Oyetunji? Yes, dear.
Please, you might have to move away from your sound system. We can hear more of the background noise. Okay.
No. Please, I think I mistakenly touched the device, please. Sorry.
Okay, you have no intention to ask it.
Okay.
No.
Now,
no problem. Thank you so much.
Madam
I saw someone, I think she's off now.
Hello, moderator.
Sorry, yes, I can hear you, sir.
Yes, I want to say thank you so much for moderating this evening. I also want to thank Dr. Rio again for making this possible for us. I thank all the participants this evening. The number grew to 55, but it has now gone down to very few, but it showed there was some bit of interest in what we were doing this evening. So thank you so much, colleagues, for the questions. My email can be got, I think, through the Secretariat. I want to be in touch with those of you who can get back to me, particularly trying to attempt the questions I put at the end of the slide. Your research area, your research topic, your research problem, the statement of the problem, the research objective. I want to see whether they are aligned together and they logically make sense. Okay? It can help one or two persons to move a bit faster. Otherwise, thank you so much. And I want to wish everybody a good night.
Thank you so much, Dr. David. It has really been a big one, converting the Goliath of the research and everything you've done tonight. Everyone enjoyed the presentation and we are so grateful. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing the knowledge with us without holding back.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I read through the chat and I saw
Thank
a lot
you
of
so
people
much.
are
Have a good
asking
night.
for the recordings of this current presentation. Please, you can have access to it via our YouTube channel. So, and the link to the YouTube has already been sent to the WhatsApp page. But if you didn't get that, just go on YouTube and type the IAIIEA, and then you'll find the presentation for tonight. And apparently, you also find the other presentations we've had before today. But if you want to access the one for tonight, the link has already been sent to the WhatsApp page, and you can also just go on YouTube and then search for our YouTube channel, and you'd be able to access the recordings for tonight's presentation. I also saw a lot of people complained about the audio. We are so sorry about that. Everybody was muted intentionally so we can have a perfect sound from the person presenting. It was when it was time for the interactive session that we had to mute everybody. So that was the reason why we had that. So we would not have interference from several other places. I hope we do understand. Thank you so much once again, Dr. David. I believe that when next we have you to speak with us, you'll be willing to address us in whatever capacity you can. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. But everyone that has made this an interactive moment, we're also grateful that you contributed, you asked questions, and made it so much, almost 2 hours delightful to stay together with everyone. Before we wrap this up, I would like to remind everyone that the annual conference is coming up, and the deadline for you to submit the abstract is this month we are entering tomorrow. So please, if you have abstracts to send in, you can visit our website at .org. You'd see all the information you need about the forthcoming conference and the information you also need about how to get your abstract across to us.
Okay, good night.
And you can as well also mail us. You get the contact information of the email sent across on the website. Once again, the website is iaiea.org. Please reach out to us. We'll be glad to hear from you. As we prepare for the forthcoming conference, it's going to be both online and physical. So whichever one suits you best, please opt for it. Before we wrap up, please let's have a word of prayer. I'd like to call Alfred. Please, can you say the closing prayer for us, Alfred?